someone?
We did. So apparently, Richmond, they pay for a service, so that there's someone who like they do a televised recording, and then they know, but they do submit minutes, um, and then there's a recording added to each section of those minutes. So we are lucky enough to need a clerk.
Wonderful. So then I guess that we will go ahead and are there any nominations for clerk? Not a one, huh? You have to unmute yourself.
Dan, can you unmute? Everyone on the task force should be a co-host.
Yeah, I can unmute. So just as a reminder, the clerk only has to record the time the meeting began, the time it adjourned, and then any motions and those votes that go with it. So it doesn't involve having to, type at the rate of speech or capture the essence of what was said. The minutes per the OMA, it really is just any actions that are taken. So it'd be like meeting began at 7:03. The agenda is what it is, and then motion made to change the name from this to this, seconded by Heidi. 10 in favor, 2 against, and then you move on. So it's a very rudimentary recording, if that helps anybody to want to jump in.
Is there an expectation for turnaround time?
Good question. It usually is done so that we can approve at this meeting. So it has to be finalized approximately the week before the meeting.
Okay.
So 3 weeks, like 2 weeks would be a very comfortable time frame.
Okay. So I have my OneNote open, so I can do the clerk duties for this meeting. I also, I think my OneNote has the ability to record audio, and I press the button to do that. I don't know how well it's going to work, but so. Yeah.
And Jessica, I also record the video, so I'm happy to share
Okay.
with you too.
Okay.
So
And-
Jessica, are you nominating?
I will make a motion to nominate Jessica to be our clerk.
I will second that.
All of those in, are there any other nominations? And all of those in favor of Jessica becoming our clerk for the minutes, please raise your hand. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like it's unanimous.
We just have to check on Indorna's because her video.
Oh, and Donis, I'm looking at her picture and not even. And Donis, we just voted for Jessica to be the clerk for our meeting minutes. Would that be a yes, a no, or an abstain from you?
Hi, I'm sorry. This is Adonis. I'm having some tech issues. Yes, I vote yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Miss Gina. So then that is now unanimous. And Miss Jessica, Jessica, can you please say your last name? Avanzinas?
Sorry, I was having trouble. My computer is being funny. It's Avazinis.
Avanzinas.
I've heard people say that it's like business. I don't know.
So then we have that unanimous that Jessica Abazenis is going to be the clerk for our anti-racism task force. Thank you.
Would move to approve the minutes if there's no changes.
That's our next item, is the approval of our minutes from our last meeting. Anyone
I'll
want to
s-
second that?
I'll second that.
Excellent, thank you, Dan. And now we'll vote. All of those in favor of approving our minutes, please let me know by the raising of your hand.
This
And
is Adonis. I
Adonis?
also vote yes.
Thank you. And that was, oh, Carla. I couldn't see Carla. Carla, do you vote to approve the minutes from November 4th? Thank you. Okay, so then that is unanimous for the approval of our minutes. And the next item on our agenda, I'm happy to see, it looks like we have a few guests visiting from the Student Involvement Task Force. Who's going to give them their introduction?
I could do it.
Thank you.
So
Excellent.
we sent out the survey to, I want to say it was maybe about 15 to 20, I'll double check the number, students, and 8 responded. I also sent out the reminder to them this morning that the meeting was held again today. And if they're interested, if they could attend, that would be excellent. So thank you for attending today. We're always happy to see our charges and our students. So we have, let's see, I know looking at my screen, make sure I see everybody. I see Maya, Anna, and Thea. Am I missing anyone else? And any one of you can unmute any participant. So at the bottom of the screen, it says participants, and I know you all do this for school. So you just click on it, you raise your hand, and then when you want to speak, and then Maya can call on you or Dan, but any member can let you know. That's how we can, anyone in the public too, who would like to do that can do that as well.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Maya, I want you to go first because you have a great name. Do you want here, let me see. There you go.
My name is Maya. I am in 7th grade, and I wanted to join the task force because there is a lot of things that people have said that is racist, and that's not right, and I think that we should change that.
Thank you very much. Good for you speaking up so early. You're off to a great start there, Miss Maya. Anna, do you want to go next?
So hi, I'm Anna. I'm in 11th grade, and I wanted to join this task force because similar to Maya, I've heard some things, and I also just want to educate myself so I can also help my classmates just learn how to be anti-racist.
Excellent leadership skills, guys. And Miss Thea?
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm Thea Brennan. I'm actually not a student. I am glad I can pass this one though. Thanks. I'm a parent that just wants to be involved. I am raising 2 white male boys that need to have strong voices for our community members. So it's really important to me. I'm a social worker. I do a lot of this work in Connecticut. And so I think it's really important within the community. So I am in it for this. And I'm really happy that this has been created. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, you did pass for a student.
And Maya, I just wanted to mention too, we had a few students who attend with our youth ambassadors with the Charahoe Youth Task Force who weren't able to make it tonight, but hope to come at future meetings. So I would like to, just see if we can keep that go and continue to invite our students. I know this may be a challenging time for any of us to make it on, but I think just to continue to make sure that that is open and available for this platform for our students to attend.
I mean, I believe that that is one of the main reasons why we are here. And I'm thankful that we are able to still meet and gather. And hopefully you'll be able to tell your friends, tell your other classmates, and see if anybody else would like to be involved. You can at least give them, an overview of your experience. Do you all have any questions of us? I believe that's something we should ask you. And do you feel comfortable enough? Just if you feel comfortable, you can just unmute yourself and.
So Maya, we should probably ask
Oh.
them to comment on items on the agenda.
Okay.
So that we are still within the Open Meetings Act, and that no discussions evolve from that the public wasn't pre-informed about. So if we move to the agenda, what the chair will do is continue the discussion. The committee, the task force themselves will discuss and debate. And then if any of the students want to participate or add, then you raise your hand and the chair will call on you.
Easy enough, guys? You can give me a thumbs up because I can see. All right. Excellent. Well, in that case, then we're going to move to the next item on our agenda, which is the subcommittee reports. Who would like to go first from one of the subcommittees?
I'm happy to start off for the policy committee. I have our notes up. Joe and Donna Startula and I met, it feels like forever ago, but it was just a little less than 2 weeks ago. And we met to continue the conversations we're having in the policy space. So the majority of our conversations at this meeting we had were around better understanding the current policies in the school. So we did a lot of conversation around the student handbooks. So we are trying to do a deeper dive. So we did take all of those off the website and have those in a Google Drive now. So I think our next step is to really do more of a fine-tooth combing through that to then find kind of some loopholes or things that maybe could be more explicitly detailed out in there. So some of the things that we did talk about, and Dartula and Donis, Joe, feel free to jump in at any time, but we said that we wanted to make sure that there was an onboarding process and orientation for students and staff, specifically calling out things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion within those handbooks, and to make sure that there was some explicit intentional language throughout the policy regarding holidays, dress codes, things like that. Also making sure that we included Narragansett specific language throughout some policies. Then we wanted to have a better understanding about the updating of the handbook, what goes into that. Is there, are there committees? Is there room for community members, students, faculty, staff to be a part of that process? If not, is that something that we could do? So a lot more conversation around that. Then we had some kind of examples of, policies that maybe we want to look at creating. So like the crafting of a diversity statement, something that's more concrete around a discrimination policy. And we talked about some more detailed things, ranging from quite a few things. One of the examples we have here is, the touching of someone's hair. And then from there, we also talked a lot about professional development, the onboarding and continuing education. That was kind of preventative and relative. and relevant, but also ongoing. So I think that may capture it, but any
I
other?
think you caught most of it there, Dan. The other piece that we talked about that's going to be most important as we move forward is that this has to, whatever we come up with, that from policy or any of our, I think our groups here, our subgroups, is that this needs to be an extension into the home, because you can't have the kids having a certain set of expectations at school if the parents aren't aware of what those expectations are. And I think we need to be able to develop something that, educates and communicates to the parents or the guardians, of this is what the expectation of your kids will be when they're at Charahoe, so that it's inclusive throughout the process. So they're not getting one message at school and then getting home and having another message, and the importance of why we're going to have these messages.
Love hearing concrete ideas come out of any subcommittee, right? Because that's the work. So I think what I'm hearing is, at least initially, you're looking at recommending the development of 2 statements / policies to be massaged later. One is a diversity statement and or anti-racism statement, which is kind of the trend that's happening in academia right now, for the onboarding process, setting the expectation for the staff and the educators of our school system, and then a partnering statement or / policy that might be embedded in like our student handbook, that book that goes home, or the electronic book that goes home, is reviewed, outlines the code, the expectations, and then guardians and students alike sign it. And so I think what you're saying is we can at least start by starting to craft some language and incorporate it into those 2 spaces. Is that an accurate summary, or am I a little off?
I think you're accurate there. And I think the other piece I think we talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, is that we need to have a checks and balances maybe throughout the year. And I'll use that coming from the corporate world. We get it in the beginning, but somewhere around 6 months in the middle of the year, there's a little, tester out there that says, by the way, what's your answers to these questions? And so that it's a reminder for people of this is what the expectations are. And so that's another piece that we'll need to look at how that can be built in. And that might be a part of the, might be a curriculum piece, but might be a testing piece, a policy, just sort of really it's maybe a statement that's read electronically. They read it and then they click, I understand. So that there is, the fact that that they've read through it and understand it.
Gina, how often, when we have a new hire, what is the evaluation timeline? How often do they get evaluated? The first year, 2 years, and then
First 3 years. It's
every what?
It's every year for the first 3 years.
Okay, so that's I think to Joe's point, right? That's a nice touch point. Something that the subcommittee might want to discuss next time is a positionality statement. That is, I'm seeing a lot of success in terms of micro-credentialing and doing this work with employees, which is having some, starting with what you're talking about, which is the expectation. If Charahoe does not lay out the expectation clearly, that we are a system working continuously and thoughtfully towards being, right, an anti-racist school system, which takes time and work, right? And it's not automatic, and it's exercise and all of that. If that was set the expectation, then a yearly positionality statement actually can show the superintendent growth, right? Because then whatever training that she decides over time is what's appropriate for our faculty and staff. There's no micromanagement of that, but that part of that yearly evaluation could be just a brief, here's my understanding of my position, whether it's of privilege, of oppression, the role I have, even the power differentials I have as a teacher versus a student, and what my position is that. And over 3 years, we could really see growth.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great I just added that onto our notes document for our work group to continue that conversation.
And the other piece I think we kind of discussed really high level is messaging in all the schools. And when I say messaging is when you walk into the doors of the high school, the middle school, the elementary school, what's that message that you see when you first walk in? And that should be kind of plastered right on the wall. But then I think most people are familiar with those word puzzles where it brings up the words of where you want to be. But it's in a kind of a maze look, whatever it happens to be. So it could be, inclusion, acceptance and blah, blah, blah. And the top word comes out to be diversity, whatever it is in the word puzzle. But those subliminal messages are very powerful when you put them throughout in an organization or a school or whatever, so that they see those messages throughout their day. Then they start to embed and they start to take ownership of them. So that's something we may want to think about as we go through this process of just gathering, creating something like that that can be put throughout the school, in the hallways and things, and having those messages or pictures of where we want everybody to be.
Joe, I definitely agree. I do believe that through sight and through sound and especially discussion, if you see it, then it gets repeated. How do you think that, or how do you propose that that's able to be done in this virtual atmosphere that we're currently in? I mean,
Well-
I understand we won't be here forever.
Right, but in a virtual world, and that's something I know, Gene and the team could probably come up with this, but when the classroom starts up, each classroom could start up, when the teacher starts the day, it could come up with, those words kind of popping in. And then, good morning, kids, how's everybody? And you don't even have to say anything because they've gotten a subliminal message, and it could be something a little different. And you can use this to, learning too, importance of learning, the power of learning, the power of reading. There's a whole lot of ways to create different messages each day when a classroom comes live. The first thing the student sees is that first 30 seconds to 60 seconds of a word message, and their eyes are going to kind of follow each word. And then that last word will be that, primary word that they may focus on.
Maybe land acknowledgements too, for the virtual environment. And those could be done for any topic that's covered, right? I mean, if you're
Right.
talking about a historical event, you can start it by saying, we're talking about this region of this part of the world, and this is the land acknowledgement. And
Katie, you have your hand up?
Lost her there.
Katie, you have your hand up?
She looks like she dropped off the picture here.
I can still see her, but it looks like she said no.
Okay,
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
okay, there we
Okay,
go.
I couldn't unmute. So I was just going to say, depending on the age appropriateness, there might be a way to create for the virtual world, create a slide deck that teachers may choose to use or not, that could also have, that as just a border throughout, or I'm sure there's a million creative ways that teachers could incorporate that depending on age appropriateness.
And I think it really comes down to how do we make sure all the work that we're doing is more than words on a page, and really making it, I think a lot of our conversation at the work group was around making it the culture of what it means to be a student, to be an educator, to be an administrator, in our district. And I think part of that will be from the culmination of everything that the curriculum group is doing, everything the practices group is doing, everything that the policy group is doing, and everything that we're doing as a full task force. The only other thing I didn't really capture it in the notes, so I need to fix that in our internal notes. But I think one of the other piece that we're starting to unpack a little bit was just, we have obviously a lot of really great policies written down, but what happens, the things that aren't maybe written that go into making, because policies are very, if this happens, then that. But we have to recognize that obviously we're all coming to that those buildings are virtually with our own implicit bias, and who is the one referring a student versus giving somebody a warning versus all of those different things. So I think that gets a lot into the conversation the practices work group is having too, but perhaps being a little more explicit in those policies, and making sure that if we're putting that on the backs of our educators, that they're as informed and educated about those expectations and those processes. And then also, I know one of the students who she was hoping to come and share a story today, but wasn't able to make it tonight, but it was really around, we have some explicit policies that we say if this, then that, but understanding it from the perspective of our students. So I know one of the stories I've heard as I'm meeting with students is they, even though like cyberbullying, for example, this specific example does intersect with the anti-racism work that we're doing, deciding I'm a sophomore, should I just grin and bear it rather than going through this process? And now for the next 3 years, 2.5 years, I'm in the same classroom with all of these other students. And now this is putting that target on my back. And that's just, so they're weighing out those pros and cons and not even going through a process that we already have covered in a policy. So I think just gathering more student input along the way, I feel like would be really important.
So if I could do, oh, there's a hand up. Sorry, Maya.
Maya, I believe is it
Hi.
your dad?
I'm Robert. I'm Maya's father. I was one of the parents that signed up to join the task force. Maya and I are just sharing a platform to make it a little more streamlined tonight instead of having 2 tiles open. I think Maya and myself growing up also both felt that at certain times it was hard to bring forward to a teacher or an administrator when incidents happen that are both forbidden by school and really should be we should be working on sort of filtering those out of our culture and society in general. So having the ability for students to either, if they can't approach their teacher in class because they feel like that relationship is too immediate, if there's somebody that everybody knows that there's a safe group of faculty and staff that they can approach at any time, either during school or after school hours, that they can bring either personal concerns or concerns, if they have a fellow classmate that's too shy to speak up, that they can bring concerns forward and have those concerns be, heard confidentially and addressed in an open manner.
Katie?
Yes, what you said reminds me of something that's been circulating in my head as well around, I know there was a big push over a decade or more ago for, kind of safe space icons that you could put, like just a sticker to say that, this is a safe space. Anything that's said here, I'm open to those conversations. And I wonder if something like, the group that Dan works with might be interested in an initiative such as that, or might be proposed. I know we had the Everybody is Beautiful, but also that it's not just a particular teacher or individual you have to approach, but you may have a better rapport with someone else.
Lisa?
So I think that is definitely an option. But to layer that, Gina, I wonder if we could look at using the say something system, see something, say something system, and market that to our student body to also use that anonymous reporting system for it, right, for exactly what Mr. George and Maya are describing. It's the safest space for students, we have learned through this virtual transition, right, is in this case, in the space they're in on their device, when they're not even having to walk into a room to say, like, is anyone going to watch me walking into, Lisa's room? And Lisa is a woman of color and she's on the anti-racist task force and she's there after school. It still has, it could still have some stigma to it. But the Say Something system exists, right? Students are already aware of it. It's already in place. And a lot of times these committees like these can have the most impact when you use systems that exist and you rethink those systems. So that's kind of Katie, like Mr. George and Katie, like that's where my head is pinging. We have that. If we were started making announcements and emails and campaigning to use that system, and you can decide what the language will be, towards being a more anti-racist school system, and students could use that. This body could then start looking at those reports. What's coming in, what school systems, right? Which buildings, what do they look like, and what's happening? And we could also serve and have like a data set. We actually could have true data to work off as well. So that's one thing, Gina, I wonder if you could speak to that for a second. And then just quickly, while I have the floor, to the point of also, who do you go to, right? Who are the faces, who are the safe people, who can you report to? That to me is the end work of the diversity statement that your subgroup talked about initially. And when you say getting things off the page, right? We need more people of color teaching our students. We need more TAs of color, and something about either our recruiting practices, our hiring practices, our search committee practices, or our geographical location is the barrier. Because what the other thing that students aren't seeing, words on the paper, yes, words on the wall, better. Faces that look like your face, right? I think that's our end game here.
And I think
saw
we'll hear a
Maya.
lot more of that in the practices work group too. They had a
Right.
big conversation about that last night.
I saw Maya's hand and then Dartula's hand, but Lisa, did you want Gina to speak on the see something, say something before?
No, I'd like to hear Dr. Hulo's thoughts, and then maybe Gina and Maya.
Okay.
So I don't start glitching, but I'm still here. Okay, so Dan and Joe did an amazing job. Many of you touched exactly on what our conversation was about. The one thing I do want to touch on that Leah brought just now was about what we really want to do. All that is identify or create a metrics that will be measurable for years to come that we can compare against. And the see something, say something forms sounds amazing to use. We also want to see some around what policy is broken, how many people, what the form look like, how many people go through the entire process, what is the end goal, is there their system around that, and who are the people that keep coming up, or the groups that keep coming up, and then even more transparency around this system and this interest, because all this message being transmitted, not just within.
Dartula, we're having a hard time. The sound is breaking up. having a hard time. I don't know if it's just me that's having a hard time hearing you right now. I think it is everyone.
No, I could hear parts, and the parts that I could hear Dartula. So maybe I don't. Is there a chat? No, that we don't have a chat
No.
on this. But I believe the one piece that I did hear Dartula mention, we had some conversations about trying to, the metrics and measurement of how do we measure change. So I think in like better understanding where we are now from, obviously like better understanding the demographics of disciplinary action now, but also, do we have students who have been filing, a complaint, and it's, is that being followed through with? Are we keeping track of that? And kind of where do we see ourselves, what happened over the last several years, what happens moving forward? So I'm not sure if that captures what Dartula, you were saying, but I know that was a part of our conversation at our last meeting.
Dartula, I am going to try to do that for you. I'm going to ask Maya. You had your hand raised.
I think another thing that would help is having the Say Something program thing more accessible, because we only learned about it for like one day in advisory. And I feel like students don't really have that great of like an access to it. So I feel like something that might help would to make it more accessible and easy to use to students. Maybe have teachers post it in a Google Classroom link or something.
I think that's an excellent idea. Lisa, you didn't unmute. We didn't hear what you were saying. Oh, it looked like you were talking. Yeah, I'm sorry. Looked like you were talking.
No, that's just me saying, great idea. That was fantastic.
It is great. I was going to ask, since we have a couple of students here, what is, do you even know about it? And do you know how to access it? So that's excellent idea. Anna?
Yeah, so I agree with Mia, sorry. We learned about an advisory, and I think it would, if the teachers have it posted on their Canvas page or the Google Classroom for the middle school, just so that's easier, that they can find it for each teacher and then they know where it is. And to also, I remember them mentioning that's like an app on their phone, or just to make sure that all students like have it downloaded or have it, they can access it easily so that they know how to do it. And so maybe make it more than just one presentation, but just remind them throughout the year.
Excellent point. The more you mention it, the more familiar you'll become with it. Dartula asked if I could call her and have her on speaker. So I think you guys will be able to hear her if I do it that way.
Hello.
Can you guys hear that? Okay, go ahead. You're live.
Thanks. As you can tell, I have tech issues. So just to backtrack a bit, one of the things that I want to make sure that I highlighted, and thank you so much, Dan, for trying to capture what I was saying, is that having a metric in place, either identifying the ones we have now, and or creating ones that we will use apples to apples for years to come, is extremely important to do in the beginning part, especially with the policies, because if we're looking at what policies are being broken quite often, what teachers are identifying these, what students keep being brought forward, and then we're also being very transparent about this measurement, either on our, on the web page and with the students. I think that it lends itself to being as inclusive and equitable as we're saying we're trying to be, because it's not just in our little community. I also strongly believe that if we're thinking about the training and the messaging, that we should very much consider those Singleton agreements, even with our group here, each of our committees, and throughout our schools, because they're very easy and simple agreements that make it possible to do this type of work, and it includes staying engaged, experiencing discomfort, speaking your truth, and accept non-disclosure, and using that as part of the messaging as well. I think that'll open up conversation with students. I think that each day, each of us that's doing our work, or students or teachers, if we're able to make this a common practice or policy that we are practicing the enrollment period as a district, and then we are consciously identifying which one are we able to uphold today, which one do we need to work on today, this week, how well are we keeping the same agreement as a community. I think that's extremely important. And yes, someone also mentioned a land agreement. I think that's huge. I think we also need to do an acknowledgement about circles as well, and how sacred circles are within the Native community here, but also within the African community. Even though there may be a small community, but there's so many cultures that value circles and the sacredness of circles. And if we're trying to create a circle of supporters for students to be able to speak up, we want to acknowledge that as well.
Could you all hear her okay?
Off and on, some of it was really quiet, but I did get a lot of that.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dartula. Did anybody else have any more discussion on the policy end?
Could we have Gina speak to the say something?
Oh yeah, Miss Gina.
So there is a section in the Say Something for Hate and Discrimination that can be used. It is 5 through 12. I don't believe it's elementary aged. So we probably want to take a look at how those get reported K through 4. If it's because we would have that report if it was done through Say Something. That's the question of it's if a child goes to a guidance counselor or a teacher versus the Say Something app, you'd have to make sure it's collected both ways via a report at the school and as well as the Say Something.
So what are your thoughts on using that tool to have students use it as a reporting tool?
Well, it's anonymous, so I think that allows them the ability to feel safe about it and not have to worry. Although I think you do have to have it both ways, right? I think there are some students who feel very comfortable going to a trusted adult in the school, an admin or a guidance counselor. So we need to capture that information that way as well as those have the opportunity who don't feel safe doing that for whatever reason and would prefer to have anonymity. Couldn't say that tonight. Prefer to be anonymous. So I think having both is behooves us, and I like the suggestions about making sure that it's not just one advisory. I get them all the time. Like I'm on the update, so I know students are using them. And typically, I haven't seen any come through with hate or discrimination, but I do know that we are getting them. They're accessing it, and I see it. And I see it both at the middle school and at the high school. So it's not. I don't see more. It's definitely feels. But the principals get the first, and then if they don't pick up that call right away, then it comes directly to me.
Would it make sense to, and I don't know how you present it, but to, this is what I'm thinking of, give examples for students as it relates to that reporting function? If you see that the bathroom's broken, you should say something, report it. If you hear these kinds of conversations, you should say something, report it. And just give examples, just kind of random examples, kind of in like a PSA for the school. So the kids know that this is another area that they could report that, because a lot of times they don't realize, oh, I can go here we're experiencing that, you know, on the Commission for Prejudice and Bias. People don't know they can go to our site and report all these different things. And so we're trying to create a PSA that really identifies, here's examples, so that it tags in their mind and say, oh, that happened to me, I need to say something.
No, it's a great idea.
And I think to Anna and Maya's point, that I think it's just about that continuing it's there, which is an awesome tool. And as you said, Gina, some students are using it, but I know from a lot of the students, similar to what Anna and Maya said, you maybe heard about it once. It doesn't feel like something the school actively wants our students to use. So I think just to continue that, to say like, it's not just a thing here to check a box, like this is truly a system that works for you, and let's continue to use it. And I think for students to own it and really use it, they need to know that things will be taken serious. And it's hard with that anonymity. We don't always know what happens. Something comes in, you don't know what the action reaction is. So I know it's challenging to, and it's not like we can communicate all of that. Well, this came in and this is what we did about it. But I think just a continuing to promote that to students will be a big helpful part of that.
Absolutely, Dan. Katie, you have your hand up.
Yes, I wasn't sure, from my understanding, I went through the, not training, but the overview that was offered about a year ago or so. And I wasn't sure, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but if it is appropriate, it's about suspicious behavior. Although I understand how that could intersect, but I don't know if there might be some blind spots with that, where someone would not consider it suspicious behavior per se. So just something to think about if it does fit.
So
what we're talking about.
if I'm understanding you correctly, when you went through the overview, it seemed as though the that function was just for like suspicious behavior and isn't currently being used for if you see any type of other action that you can see. If you see something that you can say something, is that, am I understanding you correctly?
I mean, that's what I understand. And perhaps it's only if the behavior reaches a certain level that's assessed by the individual that experienced it. Because I mean, all of the town's police were present when we had this overview and presentation that we had. But again, I'm a staff member in a particular role, so I didn't go into as much depth, I know, as others did. But I just wasn't sure if it does fit the needs, or maybe I just don't understand the full potential of the program. But I'm looking at some of their PSAs and some of their posters. And unless there's several programs that are called See Something, Say Something, it says like recognize the signs of terrorism related suspicious activity and report suspicious activity. I understand hate speech could go to such a level where you would want to report it, but I'm just saying it might be worth more discussion and reflection.
So just add to Katie. So basically on the reporting tool for us, what our staff would have had or should have had, I should say, because I wasn't there, so I'm not. The trends come up as, any criminal behavior or non-criminal behavior, bullying, weapons, illegal drugs, prescription drugs involvement, alcohol involvement, cannabis involvement, hate and discrimination involvement, and social media concerns.
So that seems, so I think it seems certainly broad enough to fit what our purpose is. And Katie, right, and this was, at the time, this task force didn't exist at the time, right? This was before the pandemic, before George Floyd's murder, right? So at the time, what were we worried about in schools? That. So it makes sense to me that Barry, right? And that would have been what the messaging was, right? So my point being that if there's a system we're paying for or we're invested in and exists, and we can download the app and we can get it on Google Classroom before the new year and start using it in these ways, I think we should figure out ways to make that work, especially if it's not, to your point, going to code, have the police have to come to the school for everything, or overutilize the wrong resources. But the categories that Gina is reading sound right. And also to acknowledge the pain, right, that microaggressions are really, right, racial abuse. And so they're microaggressions in words, but and that's what they're called. But these things result in trauma that people have to then carry. And Maya, I'm going to invoke your name here. Here you are inspired to do this work because you're carrying, right? You're carrying some weight of what you've seen, and you want to make that better. So, right, even though you might not have directly experienced it, we call that vicarious racism, right? You have vicariously, secondhand, experienced some of these things, if not yourself. And here you are motivated to do better and to help. So in terms of suspicion and the weight of it, I would encourage this task force to acknowledge that these things are painful and weigh heavily on our children. And we heard that time and time again, that children of color who experience racist behavior are the ones who are asked to forgive, forget, and move on and don't cause any more problems, right? If you're still upset, well, why are you upset? You shouldn't be upset anymore. She said sorry. I mean, those are the real stories that we've heard. So, yeah, if it can be done, I think we should. Otherwise, guys, we're looking at trying to create a system that doesn't exist, and do we have to get bids, and do we have to bring in new trainers? And so anyway, I encourage you to try to use what we have.
Right. But
Instead of recreating the wheel, right?
Yeah, but the other thing we have to recognize too is children of non-color who have to observe this and live through it too from the outside need of, what Maya was sharing is that they need a way to let others know that there's a problem, and they want to be able to be empowered. And I think part of what, have the say something state, system is great, but I think ongoing messaging, one and done in the beginning of the year, hey, go to this program if you have a problem. One and done is probably a challenge that in the process. There should be some type of messaging going on every day or once a week, twice a week. So it's always up in the person's mind of, if I see something, say something. If I see something that sounds like this, say something. If I see somebody smoking in the corner, okay, do this. If I hear inappropriate words, I need to say something. And this is the system I need to go let somebody know through. And I think that's where the opportunity is. You have a foundation. Now we just need to, increase its visibility going forward, or figure out how do we do that through, different PSA messages.
Mr. George, did any of this answer the question that you had? It seems to me as though, like Lisa brought up, that we have a platform that is available for the students. We just need to advertise it more, make it more public, and make it known that they can use this particular resource that's already in place. Did that answer the question that you had?
There we go. Hi. It does, yes, to a big degree it does. Any and all tools that the school system and the students have available to them to try to bring grievances to the forefront, and to try to just, even if it's not something that's going to result in punitive action, if students feel like somebody's hearing them, that really is hearing them, that goes a long way to making them feel a lot more comfortable in school. I mean, we have, I'm mine, may look very Wonder Bread, but my whole side of the family, my mother's heritage is all Mexican American. It's, when people see something a certain way and they judge it a certain way as you're this, and so you can't be offended by me talking about this other thing. They don't realize that, A, you can be offended by hearing it just as a person of good conscience, and B, might be offended by it because maybe they're not realizing that you have roots that speak to that particular culture. So having a safe environment where people of all backgrounds, all diversities, all cultures, can feel safe in school. And, for those of us that are adults, safe in the workplace, that's a whole more difficult ball of wax. But at least when our kids are in school trying to better themselves, if they know that they have safe avenues to bring concerns and grievances through multiple channels and have that addressed, whether it's through the See Something, Say Something, or whether they know certain teachers are on the task force and they can approach them anytime, whether they have, an email link where they could get in touch with Superintendent Picard or, their principal, their vice principal, their counselor. All of those things help to nurture, a feeling of safety for kids of all backgrounds, whether they're the direct target of something or whether they're upset by seeing other people who are targeted. Because I think both things are happening. From what I hear from Maya and from her friends and other students, both things happen, on a somewhat frequent basis in their school. And I think that we are all here because we want to create an environment that's better than that for everybody concerned.
Thank you very much. I agree. And again, the courage and leadership coming from the youth is what we're going to need to propel us forward, because we wouldn't know what was going on inside. You're the eyes and the ears, and I'm military, so boots on the ground. You're the ones that are right there in the mix. And I actually think that that's a good segue into the procedures portion. We have practices. So we have the policy that is being looked at, what's already in place, and we also have a subcommittee for practices. So what's the follow-up if you all are in agreement to go ahead and move forward to the practices subcommittee, because I think this really connects to what we're talking about, like what is the actual practice in place. Do we have somebody who's willing to speak from the from the practices subcommittee?
I'm happy to start. Carla and Katie, feel free to jump in. So we met yesterday, and we had a really great conversation, and we're actually at the point of writing draft recommendations to bring to this body. So we hope, I think by probably our next meeting, we'll probably be there. Right now we kind of made a structure, so I can go through kind of the outline of the ones that we're working on crafting some recommendations. Some are bigger than others, and then if there's anything that folks want more details on, we can go from there. The first one is around, I think, exactly what Lisa had mentioned, but hiring practices. So it's again getting back to, I think, Maya, what you were saying about transitioning over to practices is that they're so interconnected. So obviously, it's not a policy that says we do not hire educators of color. However, what's our practices? How are we recruiting? And then also a lot of our conversations last night were around the idea of the lack of representation is really impactful. So if our our Indigenous students, our young students of color are not seeing educators like Lisa mentioned who look like them. How do you see yourself in that space, and how do you go down that road and then choose to come do that back at this a school where you didn't get that? So I think that's really important. So we're crafting some recommendations and hopefully goals to some of our conversations were specifically around trying to realign or trying to align even the percentage of um, teachers of color more closely to the percentage of our student body that identify as students of color. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, but I believe that was between 8 and 9% of students who identify as color, um, and we are nowhere near that currently with our, if I'm not mistaken, we have one educator who identifies as a person of color and one TA. So that obviously there's a lot more work to do in that space to dive into the reasons why and then remedy that situation. So then the next one, getting back to similar to kind of what we were talking about in the policy group, was around discipline. So, again, getting back to the idea of, really wanting to auditing the disciplinary system, understanding what's being coded, the demographic breakdown of what's happened, and kind of moving forward from there. So again, a lot more work diving into that space. We also, something that's a little shorter of a recommendation, but right now we talked about school committee meetings are very accessible. And obviously that was a secondary thing that happened because of COVID, but we have a lot more folks who are maybe able to attend a school committee meeting now who weren't able to be there in person. So the idea of, making a recommendation that even after COVID restrictions are lifted, that we continue to make sure that meeting is accessible to all. So that's something that came up, just that practice of doing that is, we didn't think it was a policy written down that it had to be in person and in person only. So making sure that we could continue that practice if possible. Some of the other sections were equitable guidance for all students. So we wanted to make sure that, for our students of color to be, going into our guidance departments and ensuring that, our professionals who are working in that guidance department are well versed in supporting our students to make sure that they attain their highest possible potential, regardless of race, class, gender, et cetera. So from understand whether that be college or whether that be the workforce or anything in between, ensuring that our students all receive that equitable guidance regardless of those different factors. Then the last three things that we talked about the practices regarding standing for the pledge, wanting to dive a little deeper into that. Is that a policy? Is it not a policy? Currently, it seems to be classroom by classroom, the practices that we're hearing from student perspective. And then external, this one, we're trying to word a recommendation so it's separate from the great work that the curriculum work group is doing. So, but we're really thinking about it, what's the practice of updating the curriculum? And I know we heard a lot of great stuff from Ride last time, and Gina gave us some really great information, but understanding like the process for parents and community members to submit a concern. So similar to that of the disciplinary things that we heard going on with like the Say Something, like having a system already in place. But for instance, are we collecting, if somebody says there's an issue with curriculum, are we collecting that? Is there a way so that when it is time for us to, on that calendar of, let's say in 2 years, we're updating the history curriculum, do we have a place to look back and say all of these students at these times and these parents at these times submitted these, or educators at these times submitted, complaints or concerns or suggestions about a certain curriculum? Do we have that? And then finally, recommendation to continue a paid liaison position for a tribal member to serve and support the district, as we've had in years past. So Katie, Carla, feel free to jump in. I think obviously, and if anybody else has questions, but that's a pretty high level overview of kind of where our conversations have been.
It looks like Carla may have lost connection.
I thought I just saw her.
Oh, there she
Oh,
is. She's
here she
back.
comes back.
Carla or Katie, did you want to add to the overview that Dan just provided? That I thought that was pretty thorough. Dan, thank you very much.
Oop, it looks like Katie just had her hand up.
Is it up? Is it down? Yes. Go ahead, Katie.
No, I just want to verbalize that I think
You're breaking up some,
Yep.
Katie.
Dan does an excellent job giving an overview summary of our conversation. Luckily, it was just 24 hours ago. I hope, sorry, I'll turn off my video because my internet is on the fritz here. Yep. So he did an excellent overview and we've started drafting those recommendations, and I think he gave a great summary of what we discussed.
So does that mean that this is what you've started and then there'll be more coming, or is there a specific ask? So I heard the school committee one, and that is actually something the school committee has already started to talk about and discuss, and seems to be overwhelmingly in favor of continuing the most accessible practice going forward after the pandemic. Was there any other specific ask out of that subgroup?
Not yet, but basically for each of those subcategories that I overviewed, what we're doing, so Carla, Thon, Katie, and I are, we kind of split those up. So what we're doing is kind of giving a quick sentence or two about just background of like explaining what we mean by that header, and then crafting like a sentence clear ask or recommendation for this board for the task force to endorse. And then we're trying to create like a goal statement of like, how do we know, like, what does success look like in that space? So so we aren't there quite yet, but that's our next meeting. Our expectation we set for ourselves was to have a more clear recommendation or ask in each of those. But basically we had a very long grid of practices, and we narrowed it down to, this is the short list, basically.
You're amazing. So just before you move on to the next subgroup, I see commonality between the policy and the practices recommendations with the diversity statement or the anti-racism district statement for the new hires and your hiring process here.
Hiring practices, correct. I see that too, yes.
Yeah, so I think there's a really nice catch there. And I also am not sure if others felt this, but in under policy, Jessica, I talked about adding a land acknowledgement, all right, to Joe's, how are we making this part of our daily dose of anti-racism? And I see a rainbow between a land acknowledgement pairing with the Pledge of Allegiance. So those, in terms of getting stakeholder buy-in, those that feel strongly about the Pledge of Allegiance as a practice, could they expand their mindset to say, well, since that is so important to how you feel, can we consider, why not have a land acknowledgement as part of that daily practice? At the Ashway Elementary School, they do the Cougar Pledge. They say the Pledge of Allegiance, and then all those little cuties, they say, like, we will be like honest and sincere and really good people, and we love each other every day. My kids used to know it. So I just want to say, I see a rainbow, right, between that conversation and getting that group to buy in and invest in the idea of maybe also having a daily land acknowledgement.
Dartula had also mentioned that. I apologize, Dartula, I wasn't looking. She's sending me messages so that I can speak for her.
Dartula is probably like, Lisa is getting all of it.
She said,
my ideas.
She said, please bring up that I think that we need to include a singleton agreements. She also said, land acknowledgement, and circle acknowledgement. 4 agreements of courage and conversations. I can only read what she wrote, but obviously, just like you said, there's a direct correlation between both, and we seem to all be on that same page.
That's great.
So now I think we'll move on to curriculum, the curriculum subcommittee.
I can start. We talked about creating a survey for the staff at Charahoe, and we had some ideas about that, and Joe was kind enough to turn it into a Google form, and it got pushed out. I think it was during our PD day on Monday, 2 weeks ago, and then we got the results in, and we looked at them. Jessica actually took them and turned them into a bit of a spreadsheet, so we could organize the results. Jessica, would you mind sharing that?
Sure, let
Share your
me,
screen. Maybe people would be
yeah,
interested in seeing it.
okay, here it is. Can you see it okay?
Yep.
Yes, excellent.
You want to just explain it a little bit?
Okay, so the questions that were on the survey, you know, there were 3 questions, which was nice because it helped us kind of corral the data set. I took them and sorted them by the school level. So, Excel sorted it. So I have elementary, high school, and then middle school at the end. I didn't break down the data further than that, but what I basically tried to do as a first go was to try to categorize the responses. So over here, you can see that there are some categories. So where somebody answered the question, so this question here, what parts of your grade level curriculum address the issue of race? If the respondent said none, they were coded in this gray color. If they said that it was covered in social studies, you know, I gave it a different color, and kind of went through and developed these different categories kind of based on a read through of the survey responses a few times. And then I went back through and tried to collate the data for each question to kind of show what categories they bucketed into. And I also, you know, for some of these other questions, because of the sort of different nature of the questions, I may have replaced one of these categories with something else. So for example, question 2 was, how are social justice issues addressed as part of your curriculum? You know, nobody said anything specific about, you know, well, I teach science, but we don't cover it. You know, that wasn't really a relevant category for this question. So I added a new category like questions and answer sessions or discussions. Same thing here. I share articles, videos, media, or we have discussions. So I did that for these last 2 questions. And the last question was, what culturally sensitive materials do you use in the classroom? And again, because this was asking for specific materials, I kind of had to switch out some of these categories that weren't going to be used anyway, you know, in this column. And that kind of gave us an overview of I guess maybe some respondent attitudes and maybe where there are trends for, you know, maybe maturity of a DE&I sort of framework for a subject area, for example, in the curriculum. And I think, Heidi, I'll turn it back over to you because I think you had some observations about that. I don't know if you had anything specific you wanted me to show, but.
Well, one of the things that seemed to come through very clearly is people felt that there wasn't a clear direction that they should be going. It seemed rather hit or miss. Clearly, the areas of social studies and ELA felt that they were covering this subject more than other areas, which sort of makes sense. But I think the consensus was, while most people touch on it, that's all they're doing. There's no systematic way to do that. A couple of grade levels are stronger than others, but just because of their curriculum. But overall, there's not a sense that the district has a clear direction.
Yeah, I felt like that was definitely a trend. Another trend was there was kind of a lot of addressing of the curriculum question with the answer, I just treat everybody with respect, or I'm just kind, or we're, our classroom, that's our rule, we're kind to everybody. And I think that it is, those folks might be more receptive to having a direction, if there was something put into place that gave them the direction that the others said were missing. But clearly that's not the end goal here, is kindness for everybody. It kind of fits into that like color blindness bucket. So and it came up a few times. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that was kind of the answer. And then, to Heidi's point, people saying like, oh, well, we talk about civil rights, or we talk about certain holidays and traditions. That to me says that from my days in Chariho, the needle hasn't moved that far. So I think the survey was really well put together, and from just trying to manage the data here, and I probably could have done a better job with this. If I was good at pivot tables, I could have done something like that. But I think it was a good sort of pulse check, and a way to highlight opportunities. But I'll stop talking about it and let the rest of the subcommittee kind of weigh in.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? This is Adonis.
Yes, we can.
Lovely. Thank you. This has been a night of tech mishaps for me. So I really appreciated Joseph and Heidi's insight into what is happening, as Maya said, the boots on the ground as the teachers in the classrooms for our curriculum subcommittee. And they put together the survey pretty quickly and were able to have it available and have this incredible data set. I just want to say that Jessica's interpretation of the data thus far, I think, is kind of in beta. So she was really generous with her time to do this. And I think this will be part of our next subcommittee meeting, is to really suss out these themes that we're discussing tonight and identify the actionable kind of steps that would come from those major trends. So this is really the first kind of iteration that you're getting to see in terms of translating the data. Another thing that kind of came out and spoke to me in looking at the data is there's a lot of questions around grade level appropriateness, or kind of for our educators, I think that they don't need to talk about equity or race in elementary school, that the students, there's not really a strategic approach or kind of scaffolding, a scaffolded approach to teaching about race and racism. And so what are the introductory themes that we can provide in terms of curriculum for our elementary school teachers, so that they can, our middle school and high school teachers can build on that in terms of sophistication and pertinence for our young citizens going forward, and for the students that are on the call right now, like what, that they have that that sophistication, that vocabulary, that understanding of the cultural context and the landscape that they exist in, that they're able to articulate those ideas in a complex way. And that scaffolding and that foundational kind of portion of that educational trajectory begins in elementary school. So we really want to be able to support our elementary school teachers to give them what they need to begin the students on that journey, on that trajectory. So I think that goes back to what Heidi was talking about. What is the district-wide approach that's strategic and cohesive and has follow through from one school site to another?
Thank you, Adonis. Absolutely. Thank you, Heidi and Jessica. Jessica, don't knock yourself. I think this is an incredible worksheet. And as Adonis mentioned, this is going to be very helpful for you guys moving forward to I see a whole lot of gray area, and that's exactly what is the gray area. That says a lot. This is a fantastic spreadsheet. Katie.
Every time I go to speak, it says my internet is unstable. So I'm getting Ajna here about it. I hope you all can hear me. I just wanted to make the point that's come up in previous circles and conversations about, this type of work really fitting nicely into social studies, but perhaps making some recommendations or just bringing this out in conversation somehow that, in every curriculum, there are places to make these points and embed this information, even if it's, there's traditional ecological knowledge, there's TEK, there's, studying different sports that you could bring up in PE and the history of those, for example. So I know it often seems like maybe this work would happen in like health or social studies or certain places, and other teachers just kind of step back from it. But I think finding ways to make it everywhere and everything, or finding certain ways to make it brought up in every class and make those connections, I think is critical. So I applaud the work of this group.
Absolutely. Miss Thea, I see you raising your hand. Is that correct?
No, I wasn't. I was just stretching. But I will say this, I found it interesting that some teachers in some disciplines felt that it didn't apply to their discipline. And that to me is concerning. And I think as a district, we need to be sending the strong message that this doesn't happen in a vacuum and it applies everywhere. And that I think that's just something that's got to somehow get communicated better to everybody. I also think that we do need more in the way of concrete materials to be using. I think that would really help the teachers to be able to address this if they had more resources at their disposal.
Absolutely. Thea, I see your hand is up, and then Katie and Anna.
Hi, yes, thank you. So a question, and I don't know that it necessarily falls into curriculum or maybe practice, but I'm wondering about conversations around trainings, right? So like racial justice trainings, implicit bias trainings for not only staff, but students. Is there a talk about maybe adding that into the curriculum or even into professional development?
We are in the policy work group. We are talking about like a tiered level of PD. So I think we are probably all talking about it a little bit in some ways, but I definitely think that's super connected to even just what Heidi was just sharing about. If we don't think it's part of our, if we think, well, okay, we're just talk about the only reason why race is to be brought up is if we're talking about the history and we're done with racism, then we're missing so much of what's happening here and now rather than, I mean, even right down to health class. Why did I learn about how I can wash my hair and hygiene, but why did my peers of colors not learn about care for their hair? So just it should be in every single curriculum, but it's not. So yeah, and I think part of that is training in PD. But sorry, some other folks had their hands up.
Katie and then Anna.
This point was on our practices large chart when we first started brainstorming, but I can't figure out if it connects to practices or policy or curriculum or all of them, or like somehow a blind spot in between. But somewhere in there, I'm thinking through the issues related to race and racism and my experience with sports and after school sports, right? It's not curriculum, but there are various mascots and Tempers Flare, and also teams from different areas. You're maybe verging on being unsportsmanlike, and there can be concerns there. So I don't know if there are policies or what group would think through any potential concerns related to that, because it just doesn't particularly seem to quite nicely fit into any of the groupings. But, having gone to Pontigansett and graduating there, there was an infamous basketball game, which then led to, us having an inner city school visit our school. We visited them. And that's my biggest learning experience in high school, or was related to that. And I don't know if those similar situations are happening here, and how coaches might be trained or dealing with areas of concern related to the subject matter for this task force.
So I'll just quick jump in before Anna and Maya speaks. They both have their hands up. Let's, on that one, let's put just a pin in it, because I'm waiting on some articles from our lawyer, from John Anderson, because we did start already talking about symbology and I've asked him to give me some parameters for this group around what we may be able to create and enforce around things like the Confederate flag and swastikas and representation of hate groups, and what we can't, and where the ACLU. So I'm actually doing a lot of that research for all of you now. And I wonder, Katie, if some of that representation of mascots probably gets swept up into that. And he's pulling some case law for me to look at. So as soon as I have that, I'll make sure that Maya knows, and we'll get that on the agenda in packets for you.
Anna, thank you so much for being so patient.
Yeah, so just for kind of like the content basic curriculum, throughout my years, I've kind of experienced mainly like a one-sided perspective, mainly in history and English, where a lot of the books or texts we read are just from mainly like a white male perspective. And I think it's important to maybe like change the like required books that we read, because I know like last year we've read like Catcher in the Rye and other books that I think that I actually found a website, I can find it again, where they took those books and found like a similar theme to them, but from a different perspective, where students were able, I think that's just important. And then to also have conversations starting from a young age, where the teachers kind of facilitate them and students can feel more comfortable talking about race and know what they're allowed to talk, or what's respectful to talk about, and how they can support their peers.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Maya?
I agree a lot with what Anna said. Like I think a lot of like the main reason is a lot of the textbooks that we're using are really outdated, and like she said, they're really like blindsided and only show kind of one side of history, and makes people like Christopher Columbus, for example, look like some sort of hero, when really that's not 100% true.
Absolutely.
I already know I'm breaking whatever rules here, but I just can't. I am astounded by you two. And I don't say that like that. I feel like you two are heroes. You're the example. I mean, you're starting out and you already have this open mind and already knowing that you need multiple accounts of a story is setting you light years ahead of your peers, light years ahead. And I want to thank you for being so open-minded. And I encourage you to continue on that path, continue to provide your input, and continue with that flame inside of you. No, that's not on the agenda, but I'm sorry, these kids are amazing.
I would totally agree with you on that. And so I'm a product of California schools. And one of the things I did notice when I came to the Northeast is the narrowness of the curriculum. And one of the things we may want to do is reach out to some of this, the West Coast school districts, because the diversity aspect has been in California for a long time.
Maya, I have some information from Dartula. I'm gonna just summarize for her because she's still having tech issues. Under curriculum, an idea might be to create a partnership, a mentorship program for students in Charahoe with BIPOC members of our community that are in prestigious political influential positions throughout the state, so that while we're looking to establish better representation here in Charahoe, that with a mentorship program that will at least begin the opportunity for students within our district to see people of color in successful, meaningful work that could then lead to things like internship and growth and learning. So that is from Dr. Willow, which is brilliant. And I wonder if Katie and Gina, does any part of the XQ grant, is there anything there that can grab onto this, or would that be a build from scratch program?
Katie, are you?
Yes, I'm with you. The areas that we're focusing on for this year of XQ definitely relate to ninth grade transition, work-based learning, and then our Imagine Immersion experiences. So one of which is the sister school relationship we started with Hope High School last year, which at this time is obviously a complex one to navigate, as you can imagine, but also the ongoing relationships that we have with the Tamaqua Museum and other tribal members. So those are areas that are directly written into the grant. We'd even talked about seeing if once the Diversity Book Club perhaps read through their first book and had established themselves as a group, maybe reaching out to Hope High School, for example, and seeing if they might like to join virtually and read a book collaboratively, since you can do that quite well in a virtual environment. But since it was such a nascent idea, we were just kind of waiting for things to take off. And again, with things changing on a daily basis, we just want to make sure that we're being respectful as well of situations and scenarios that administrators are trying to navigate, but we think it's a ripe opportunity. I'm not sure if a mentor program could fit within the XQ grant, but I know that they've been very gracious and flexible throughout this whole process. Like, we were in the State House presenting and hearing who were the first placers, and the next week the pandemic hit. It was such a wild experience, to hear Governor Raimondo, congratulating XQ members, and then to start seeing all this unfold, as you can imagine. So they've been very gracious in being flexible with our funding. And we have the rest of the school year to think through how that might work. And we were trying to focus in those kind of key areas of ninth grade transition, work-based learning, and then Imagine Immersion is definitely a really ripe area related to the work that we're doing here. But I also had my hand raised because it reminded me of an idea that we had in our practices group, which was related to mentorship. Although it's not exactly the idea that Dartula was sharing, we were giving that idea as an educator network for diverse educators to come through perhaps as speakers and share their experiences. We have a wealth of Native educators that are Charahoe alum as well that could certainly share their experience even with elementary students early on to inspire them and show them, you know, the path that they've taken. So we talked about that perhaps being some way, even though it's quite long-term, to ultimately get our numbers up in terms of educators of color. You know, what's 20 years when we've already been here 60 years to inspire students and make those connections. So we were talking similarly about mentorship and, you know, using the rich resources we have around us to inspire our youth.
And just to add to Katie said, I think we're always looking for opportunities to sort of broaden the work through grants as one way. Also, the opportunity that we're looking at the elementary, middle, and high school ELA resources with the state requirement. We have to adopt a new curriculum. So one of the lenses that we're absolutely using is the equity, diversity, cultural proficiency, and competency.
Jessica, I saw your hand up.
So I just wanted to, I mean, I like the idea of the partnerships and mentor relationships, but I also, you know, from the work that I'm currently doing at my job, one of the things that has come up that I've tried to push a lot is that when it comes to that type of working relationship where in a sense, there's some amount of burden on the partner or mentor in that relationship who is a person of color or somebody from a marginalized community, that there ought to be some type of compensation. And I think from a like a school perspective, I don't know, besides a grant, how you would justify, you know, maybe compensating people more for their participation in a program like that if they're part of a marginalized community. But I wonder if there's some way to do it where even like a school system or an individual school that has participating members could be given grant funding or something like that. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's completely impractical for public education, but it just seems like, you know, while those partnerships and mentorships, I'm sure, have a lot of value on all sides, I do worry about essentially having burden placed on people in marginalized communities. You know, it seems like it could present itself in that way.
Dartula?
I'm gonna turn my video off. Am I breaking up? It's okay?
It's better, yes.
Okay. So Jessica, I so appreciate you saying that. Member of the BIPOC community, I have sat in both positions where I was put in a position that seemed like I'm just doing this very basic thing, and then it started to become this burden where I'm solving this world problem. But I think general idea of this program is just a very basic mentor idea, and not a let's use this group to solve our problems. Let's use this group and leverage them to do this additional type of a work. It literally would be a, hey, you're interested in running a daycare? You're a BIPOC community member running a daycare. it's just to have them see individuals in that community doing amazing things to help reverse the stigma of negativity of members of the BIPOC community being in jail, being in the streets, all these other negative things. And we can look at that. I'm also I'm part of another group as well. We're looking at that compensation piece because it's turning in that direction. But for this specific idea, I hope that it wouldn't turn in the direction at all, because that would not be the purpose. And one of the biggest to reverse, one of the very biggest meetings that I hope we can correct with the curriculum is to stop saying slaves from Africa, because slaves didn't come from Africa. Lawyers, doctors, masons, teachers, those are the people who were stolen from Africa. If we could make that very simple edit, that would be absolutely amazing. And when we do acknowledgement, which we absolutely must, we should also do a circle acknowledgement and acknowledge the fact that not only do Indigenous people use circles as a very sacred piece, but so do Africans. And for who do not know Liberian history, it's backwards history of America. And that would be something to add into our curriculum as well, because we have a very strong connection of the slave trade, and that is something that's already established. So touching on the mental piece and then throwing my other piece about the curriculum. Hopefully you all heard me.
It was broken, but I think we got your main points very clearly. Katie, you had your hand raised.
And I apologize if I'm taking too much space, but I do have a lot just percolating in my mind. But folks asked, is there any other way but a grant? So that obviously makes my ears chime. So certainly grants for funding opportunities, but then I know that in the past we've also utilized title funds for initiatives, potentially, if there's the possibility, as well as adding it into the budget is also the potential. And that's specifically why the practices group proposed to have a funded liaison position, because it's quite easy to say like, oh, let's have a liaison, like someone liaise with us. But then it's quite another to say like, no, we're putting money behind this and we're supporting this because we see the value and absolute necessity and utility of this role. So we acknowledged that as well. But XQ may be a potential. XQ in particular, just a point that I may not have made is specifically for the high school. So there's that, but we found ways of leveraging, like how can you do anything just for the high school if obviously students are coming from like K through, you don't start this work in 9th grade. So we found creative ways of doing that as well. But if folks see grants that they think connect here, and I have a couple that I'm thinking through and working on currently as well, I would love to see them and love to discuss.
I don't think you're taking up too much space, Katie. Thank you very much for all of your input. I believe that during this committee reports, we went over what the next steps each committee was going to do, which was very helpful in wrapping that up and wrapping up each category. So our next agenda is agenda item, is to schedule our next meeting. So that obviously will be into the new year then.
There's a hand up, Maya.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who am I missing? Mr. George, go right ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, to finish up where we just were, I know that especially now, getting grants and moving funds around and, coming up with new programs to bring people from outside school. It sounds like you're working that. I know that it's problematic, but in the meantime, what would be the possibilities of just
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Mr. George. Is
asking
anyone else?
or making it incumbent upon your current staff from K through 12 to come up with monthly diversity
I have a hard time
push.
hearing you, George. Is anyone else?
You want to mute the video? Is that better now?
Yes.
Are
That's
you
better.
on the internet right now? Can you now be on the internet for a minute? Can everybody hear me now? Okay. So like I was saying, I know that you're all working on trying to, get funds for the future and everything internally. There are a lot of really great teachers, that Maya's had right through, first grade on up through her current grade. Why not make it incumbent upon every teacher in every subject field to dedicate some time each month in their curriculum to try to include more diversity education in every class with every student? There's rich white men are not the only mathematicians in the world or scientists in the world or, athletes in the world or doctors in the world. And getting their stories out in the appropriate subject fields on a monthly basis will really help expand kids' understanding that there's a bigger world out there than just what the current White House wants us to see. There's a big world out there, and if every teacher can put forth, put aside one day a month to make it Math Diversity Day, Science Diversity Day, Physical Education Diversity Day. I know they go over it in history, but even some of the history Maya's bringing home, there's a lot of history out there that's not being told at her grade level that could be very easily included, even if it's just a few days a month here and there. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. George. I saw a lot of head nodding, a lot of agreements going on. I would even be one to venture to say that it could be included without even being specified as Diversity Day, because we tend to always focus on social studies and history, and that's one of the main points that Indigenous people we try to get the message across is we're still here. It's not just history. So for us to specify it as as being inclusive, and rather than just incorporate and saturate what's already out here with everything that we have, to say what you were saying, Mr. George. I mean, there's plenty of scientists, there's plenty of mathematicians, there's plenty of doctors. I believe we just sent somebody right up into one of these little space shuttles. We're in every aspect. There's races everywhere. If we just flood the current curriculum with the truth that is now, we're not trying to recreate anything. It's just we're trying. This is not my platform to start speaking, but I agree with you, Mr. George. And I saw everybody else's heads nodding also.
I think Anna had her hand up.
Yeah, I just had it kind of reminded me in one of my classes a way, like a short-term fix or solution that we could do to if we didn't want to change all like the books, or if we didn't if it wasn't feasible, like with finances and stuff, was that one of my teachers uses like an additional sources page. So like after every subject that we learn, we explore like these different sources from different perspectives. So that could be, if we do that in all areas, then that could be a way to get different perspectives in a short period of time.
Great idea.
Excellent suggestion. Miss Heidi. Unmute, Miss Heidi.
Sorry. Joe, I just saw your email. Joe had emailed me that he can't unmute his mic, nor can he turn on his video, but he's here. He's saying hi to everyone and he's listening. So that's all.
Okay, I'm doing a last little check here to see if I see any more hands up. And I do not. So to schedule our next meeting, which would be the first week in January, is that what we're looking at? Second week in January. Yes, Maya?
I have something quick to add. I was talking to my friend about attending this meeting, and she said that she would be interested in maybe joining. So is there a way that like she could join and like attend the meetings?
Yes, it's a public meeting, so both you and you can invite as many people as you want. This is one of the reasons, Maya, it was so important for the school committee to create this as a subcommittee rather than a club or a think tank, is so that we follow really transparent public practices. And one of those things is called Open Meetings Act. So we always publish an agenda. You'll always know what we'll be talking about, and the link will always be available to everyone in the public that wants to come. Doesn't mean everybody, right, will be able to flood the chair with comments. She may have to sometimes moderate, and she's done, as you can see, an outstanding job this evening of moderating. Absolutely outstanding. But yes, please, never, don't even ask permission. Just yes, anyone who has a vested interest or a curiosity about how to move our district forward as an anti-racist district through the lens of diversity, inclusion, and equity, come. So yes, wonderful question. So please, yeah, have your friends come.
Absolutely. There's more of you out there. This is awesome. So are we looking at what did you say, the second week of January, Katie? Oh, I was following your lead.
Should be the first week of
The
February.
first week.
Yeah.
So then
Be January 6th.
The 6th.
Yeah.
And Chair, under this item, we are also for future confirming the next agenda. I just want to ask you to include reopening the discussion of our name, or the renamed group, not to change it, but because as a practice, the subcommittee voted to change the name from anti-racist to anti-racism. It needs to go back to the school committee. Right, and you need to formally ask the school committee to accept that, because it's just a bureaucratic situation. So I'll explain that fully, and somebody on the task force can make a motion to get it formally to the school committee. So if you would please add that to your next agenda.
Okay.
Just broadly reopening the discussion of the renaming of the task force. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we need to vote on that now?
No, we can't. It's not on the agenda.
That's for the next agenda, right? Okay. So then our next meeting will take place on the 6th, January 6th. And I encourage you, especially you all that came to visit, to tell everyone about it. Can I have a motion?
I would move to adjourn the meeting, and you did an outstanding job.
Thank you.
Phenomenal.
And I'll second.
Excellent. All in favor of adjourning for 9:03?
Aye.
And Donis, Carla? It looks to be unanimous to me. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. And we will see you next time.
Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.